Again, my name is Matt Potere. I'm CEO of Sun Life Financial, and we make residential loans to homeowners to help them go solar and save money. So as Chris said, we're going to talk a little bit about climate change, what's happening and what some of the drivers are. But we're going to focus most of the time on solar, the benefits of solar, both economically as well as how it can benefit the environment. And then we'll take a peek and talk about some of the technologies that are coming up as well. So first, let's talk about why this matters. So 2017 has been a historic year for climate change. Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Jose. We had historic heat waves on the West Coast in California, followed by historic fires. We're seeing climate events happen more and more. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So to give you some context, since 2010, in the United States alone, we've had 24 500-year climate events. So United States alone, 24 climate events that are supposed to happen once every 500 years have happened 24 times. So climate change is real. NASA's forecasting that the climate will increase by 2 to 6 degrees Celsius over the next 100 years. And it's going to have a material impact to the way that we lived and to our security. So the World Health Organization documented some of what this change will do. We'll see less access to clean drinking water. We'll see more disease and more airborne disease, and the spreading of diseases will happen more rapidly. We'll have more pollution. We'll see 7 to 8 million deaths attributed directly to climate change. And through 2030, we'll see billions of dollars in damage from climate change alone. So it's significant. It'll impact every aspect of our life. And I'd ask you to think about what you think that will mean to global security. And so the Pentagon has also looked at climate change as a major threat to our national security. They think about global change as a multiplier or an accelerator to existing problems. So take Syria and Isis. It was a volatile situation, but what most people may not realize is Syria is going through a 900-year drought, the worst drought in 900 years. And so as military analysts have looked at it, what's happened underneath and what's given ISIS the opportunity to take advantage of a situation is you have farmers moving out of the countryside because they can't make a living with a drought like that, and they're moving into the cities. And so it takes a volatile situation and it just makes it even more volatile. And in came ISIS to fill that void. So climate change didn't cause ISIS, but it certainly made it worse. And we'll see more and more of that. Think about when we have less drinking water and more volatile storms and everything else. So it's a big problem, and it will impact every aspect of our life. So why is it happening? Well, we're seeing an increase in greenhouse gases. This graph from NASA will give you a sense for the CO2 concentration levels in the atmosphere over the last 500,000 years. So we are almost twice the next highest peak. And if you look at those upticks, it's hard to see on this graph because it's a 500, the scale is 500,000 years. But that recent peak is over 150 years. It's since the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at the prior peaks, and if you could zoom in, you'd see those are actually over thousands of years. And so we're seeing CO2 levels not just go higher than they ever have, but go up much more rapidly. Look at the line across. The line across is 1950. So it's virtually straight up since 1950. And what's driving that, a quarter of what's driving greenhouse gas emissions is the power, it's electricity and it's heat. And so solar can make a huge dent in what's driving greenhouse gases. Solar would take out about a quarter of those greenhouse gases, and the good news is, beyond just the environmental benefits, solar creates jobs. It's a driver for our economy. It's why solar truly enjoys bipartisan support. It's no longer a liberal thing or a conservative thing. It's something that everyone has been able to get around. I joke often that when I go to Thanksgiving now, my really liberal niece and my grumpy old conservative uncle can both agree that what I do is actually worthwhile, and they don't agree on anything. So it gives you some sense. It really does help all aspects and helps create a better quality of life for us. And then finally, solar saves money. And so it's not just creating jobs, it's saving homeowners money in the process. Let me talk a little bit more about jobs. So there's been a lot of talk about coal and the loss of coal jobs, and it's certainly something that we as a society and as a country need to deal with. But let me share a couple of facts with you. Solar employs twice as many people, more than twice as many people as coal. That's a fact. Solar created 1 in 50 new jobs last year. That's a fact. And another fact is that the U.S. Labor Department is forecasting solar installer to be the #1 fastest growing job in the United States over the next 10 years. So solar really is creating good, high quality jobs. The renewable revolution is about creating sustainability for us and for our economy. So how does it work? So put a solar panel on your roof, the sun shines down, hits the cell, it generates electricity. That electricity then flows, it's DC current. That DC current flows to an inverter. The inverter converts that electricity from DC to AC, and it hits your breaker box, it flows into your breaker box, and it powers your home, just like any other electricity that you use. So during the day, you're producing more power than you can actually use. In the evening, and so while you're producing more power than you can use, you're sending that power back out to the grid. And your meter is actually spinning backwards. And so you're getting credit for all that extra power that you're generating and sending out to the grid. In the evening, when the sun stops shining, you're drawing power back off the grid, and you pay the net difference. And so typically solar will displace 80 to 90% of the power that we produce. So your electric bills will go down by 80 to 90%. It's important to note, in most cases, you're not actually disconnected from the grid. You're typically still connected to the grid. Now, as we look at the market, the U.S. market is huge. You look at the U.S. relative to other markets, it's a huge market, it's a huge opportunity, and it's really, really early for solar. Less than 1% of rooftops today, U.S. rooftops have solar. We're lagging other countries. Germany has 4 times that many. Australia has 16 times that number. So it's really early, but there's a huge, huge market opportunity. An interesting fact, we're actually building new homes faster than we're putting solar on the roof. So actually our penetration is technically going down a bit.
Excuse me, what's the 151 number represent?
It's the total electricity market in the US. So that's the total amount of electricity that's produced and how much is produced by rooftop solar. So the good news, big market really early, but the good news is it's growing very rapidly. We're seeing installations increase by about 10% compounded year over year. And if we look out at cumulative capacity generated from rooftop solar, over the next 5 years, we'll see a 2.5% increase. So remember, you put a system in 5 years ago or 4 years ago or 3 years ago, still producing power. It produces power for about 30 years. And so on a cumulative basis, we're creating more and more capacity. And so we'll see it continue to rise really rapidly. So the reason that we're seeing the increase in solar is that we're ultimately displacing utility power. If you think about the dynamic that's happening here, you're producing power on your roof that needs to be cheaper than the power that you could otherwise buy from the utility. And there are 2 trends that's helping to fuel the growth. One is the cost of utility power is increasing. Every year, 2 to 3% on average, utility costs go up. In good times and in bad, in low rate environments and in high rate environments, we see costs rise. And so that makes solar on a relative basis cheaper. The other thing that's happening is the cost of solar itself is coming down. The panels are getting more efficient and the ability to manufacture them, the cost to manufacture them are coming down as well. And so on a net basis, 8 to 10%, they're becoming 8 to 10% more efficient per watt every year. And so as those trends continue, we continue to have more and more customers who will economically be able to benefit from solar. Today, solar is very much a local game. And so again, it's based on the power and the cost of your power, and it's really popular in the Southwest and the Northeast. You probably expect the Southwest, maybe to a lesser degree the Northeast, but it's driven by 3 things. It's driven by the cost of your power because you're offsetting that. It's driven by the incentives that are available to you as a consumer, and then it's driven by how much the sun shines. The third one is actually less important than the first 2. And what's interesting, so you'll see Southwest, Northeast, that may or may not make sense to you, but what you also see is some states that you wouldn't traditionally expect. As the cost of utility power increases, as solar gets cheaper, states that are not traditional solar states are starting to get in the money, and it's starting to make good economic sense. So places like Minnesota or Iowa or Missouri, those are not places that probably come to mind when you think about solar power. It's starting to get more and more viable, and we see, as a solar finance company, we see good demands in those markets.
Is the incentive structure for consumers at the state level rather than federal?
So there's a federal 30% tax credit that will go until 2021, and then there are also a variety of state level and utility level incentives, and they vary greatly. Sometimes they're credits that you get for producing power, sometimes they're a discount, sometimes they're a credit off of your system. It very much depends.
What's the most favorable market?
So Massachusetts has a really strong program in place where they give you credit. The utilities have to buy credit, renewable energy credits, and those credits are actually valuable to the utilities. And so if you produce power, you can sell those credits back, and there's actually a market for them. And so that's been something that's really helped to drive adoption in a place like Massachusetts.
The unit cost of 3.08, does that include the incentives and credits being given by the government?
So the unit cost the decrease in cost over time is absent the incentives. So the incentives can help make it more or less economically viable in a certain place. Yep. So one of the things that's happened over the last few years is the way in which customers go solar has changed. So traditionally, if you wanted to go solar, you would lease the system or you'd pay cash for it. And if you think about it, if you own your home, you'd probably want to own what's bolted to your roof. And so a lease is a little bit psychologically awkward. The other challenge with the lease is there's economic leakage. There are investors that have to get a return that you as a homeowner can monetize yourself. And so we've seen, as companies like Sunlight have brought capital into the market, we've seen an increase in demand for ownership. And that was one of the things we expected when we launched our business. It's happened faster than we could have expected. And you can see from 2014, it was 28%. More than half the systems built this year will be owned and not owned by a third party this year, and we expect that to continue to grow. So that makes it easier for consumers to save money and helps to fuel companies like Sunlight and expand the use of solar. So let's take a minute and talk about what the economics look like for an individual. So this is just a typical customer. The orange bar on the left is the utility bill before going solar. So $160, $165 utility bill before solar. After you go solar, remember you displace probably 80% or so of that. So you've got about $10, $15 in a utility bill afterward. You have a loan payment for a little bit more than $100, and you're saving about $40 a month. And so what's interesting is this is the only loan in my career that I've ever given that I give you a loan, your cash flow gets better the next month. You immediately start to save money by getting a solar loan. And so it's $40 and you've got 30 years. What's also benefiting is, remember, you're displacing the cost of the utility power, and that's getting more and more expensive over time. So that $40 is growing over time. And so the typical customer can expect to save on a $30,000 system, they can save $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 over the life of the system. So again, good for the environment, but good for consumers' pocketbooks, and that's how we get real mass adoption. So I'll tell you a little bit about Sunlight. We were launched in 2014. As Chris said, we have offices in New York. We have an office here in Charlotte and then an office in San Francisco. We have 60 employees today and growing rapidly. We've roughly doubled over the last year. We've raised over $1 billion in capital, and we've approved roughly $1 billion in loans. And if you look at the savings from the customers that we finance, they'll save about $1.5 billion over the life of their system. So pretty nice impact for a relatively young company. And if you think about the environmental benefits, the systems that we financed are the equivalent of planting 1.2 million trees. So it's to give you some context for what the environmental impact is of some of what we're doing, and we're proud to be a part of it. So our model is an indirect lending model. Just like when you go to an auto dealer and you decide to buy the car and they introduce you to a finance company, we have similar relationships. So for instance, if Tesla came out to your home, sat at your kitchen table, talked to you about going solar and you decided to go solar, once you decide to make that decision, or once you make that decision, they'd introduce you to Sunlight, and we'd provide the financing. We have relationships with many of the largest installers, and you can see, as I mentioned, $1 billion in approved loans. You can see we're on a really steep trajectory. We're really thrilled with where the business is. So let's talk about some of the technology. So I mentioned before that most customers don't go off-grid and that they're sending their power, net metering, they're sending their power back out to the grid. Increasingly, though, there are battery storage companies that are coming online. So Tesla has the Powerwall, Mercedes has announced a new battery, Sonnen, which is a German company, is entering the US market, and that gives consumers some additional benefits. So first, for consumers who have, or homeowners who have batteries, during the day when they're drawing that power, they can store it, and they can store it locally. What that means is in the case of a power interruption, they have access to power, just like you would if you had a generator. And so it gives you some security. The other benefit of it is you can hold that power and you can send it back out to the grid when the grid needs power most. And so in peak periods, when the utilities will pay the most for that power, you can send that power out. It's called time of use benefits, and then you get reimbursed at the highest rate. Now, there are also a number of utilities that are starting to work with battery companies and homeowners locally because they view that as a distributed source of power. If you're a utility, one of the things you hate is during peak times, you've got to fire up these dirty old coal power plants. They're expensive, and they're not always as stable as they would like. And so the ability to be able to draw power and do it on demand helps to create more grid stability, helps to lower cost, and it's a source of clean power. And so there are, for instance, Con Ed in New York is running a pilot right now to try to balance out and use some of the battery storage. So the solar roof. Has anyone heard of the solar roof? Anyone familiar with it? All right, so it's a pretty cool, really remarkable product. And in October of last year, Elon Musk and at the time Solar City, now Tesla, announced the new solar roof product. We were fortunate enough to be there when he announced it and when they unveiled the product. And aesthetically, it is amazing. We were on a set in Hollywood at Universal Studios, and there were 4 houses, and we were looking across the street, and one of the houses, actually this house, was there, and we thought he might be unveiling the solar roof. We didn't know for sure, and one of the guys I was with said, I think that might be a solar roof. And I thought to myself, well, wow, yeah, you can't even really tell. That's pretty amazing. And I looked around at the other houses, and I thought, Elon's going to come out. He's going to point to that house and say, see, you didn't even know that one of these 4 was a solar roof. And so he came out, pointed to the first house, as we expected. Then he pointed to the other 3 houses and said, they're all solar roofs. The one 10 feet away from my head, literally like right there, was also a solar roof. So it's really aesthetically, you cannot tell the difference. It comes in 4 different styles, and the way it works is it's a glass roof. It's a premium roof. From above, from overhead, the sun shines through the glass, hits the cell, and produces power just like other panels. But when you look at it on an angle, when you look at it from street level, it looks like one of these roofs. It's highly durable. It's got a 100-year warranty. And again, it's a pretty remarkable product. It's a premium product. It's 50 to 75 grand for the roof. And so you wouldn't just put it on there to get a roof. You would do it because you recognize the benefit of the power and the fact that while it's 75 grand to start, you're producing power every day, and that's offsetting your utility bill. And so when you look at it all together, it's a great way to be able to get a premium roof at a lower cost. So when you think about solar, batteries, we didn't talk about electric vehicle chargers, but EV chargers, these are all solar roof. These are all part of what's becoming a smart home, an energy efficient smart home. And so some of it is fueling supply and how we create power. Other technologies are reducing demand. So this morning, I got a message on my phone from my sprinkler system that said, due to the weather, it's skipping a cycle. My sprinkler was smart enough to monitor the weather, know the time of year, understand how much rain that we've gotten, and determine that we didn't need to waste water to water my grass again. It's smart enough to be energy efficient. And the sprinkler is just the start of that. My thermostat does the same thing. It monitors when I'm home and when I'm not home, when it believes that we're all asleep at night and when we wake up in the morning, how warm or cold it is outside, and adjusts automatically so that the whole home is using less power. And there are increasingly technologies to integrate all of these devices. So you walk into your home, your LED, which is energy efficient light bulbs, they turn on or off based on whether anyone's in the room. No more yelling at your kids to tell them to turn the lights off. It does it automatically. And so that's all of that integration is coming. And it's, again, the parts are all here. So it's an exciting time. We at Sunlight are thrilled to be a part of it, and we're certainly pleased with where we are so far, and I'd be happy to take your questions.